Hi, my name is Cass McBride. I will be presenting my research proposal, which is about perceptions of aid. It specifically examines the impact of NGO funding in the conflict-affected areas of Afghanistan. My research proposal intends to be the framework for examining global NGO funding in other conflict-affected areas. Recently, humanitarian aid has been a focal point of geopolitical scrutiny, specifically US aid. The Department of US Aid funds a lot of NGOs, and there was some recent political scrutiny from the current administration. NGOs have been central to the UN's goal for global development, as well as the US has spent a lot of money in funding different NGOs and providing humanitarian aid. There is plenty of literature on both sides discussing the pros and cons of providing NGO funding, specifically in Afghanistan, whether or not the funding is contributing to the Afghan community development or if it's funding the current government. Afghanistan has received NGO aid far before 9/11. Following the withdrawal of US troops recently in 2021, the Taliban regained control of the Afghanistan government. The Taliban has implemented several restrictions on NGO aid, despite marked increase in poverty levels and a decrease in the economy. Providing aid to Afghanistan has a safety risk, causing a decline in humanitarian aid. There have been reports of fatalities, kidnapping, threats against NGO personnel, passing restrictions on NGO aid registration requirements, and they have violently targeted NGOs operating in Afghanistan. There have been several reports of aid being sent to Afghanistan being misappropriated or diverted or misused by the Afghan's current government, which is largely regarded as a de facto government by the world. This has caused significant barriers in providing aid, but when aid is provided, there's not a guarantee that NGO funding is going to be used for what has been allotted for. Despite these factors, the Afghan people are facing multiple crises. There are restrictions and violence against women and girls. There's multiple unlawful attacks, killing, arbitrary arrests, execution, and torture. While there is documentation of violence against NGO funding, the multifaceted crises in Afghanistan cause for an ethical dilemma. Whether we send NGO aid, perhaps it's going in the hands of the Afghan government, but what would be the consequences of not sending aid? My research proposal methodology will be a mixed methods comparative case study design to investigate NGO funding on Afghan civilians and the government. The independent variables of my research will be NGO funding level and then date of aid provided to examine conflict affected areas before and after receiving NGO aid. The dependent variables are going to be economic development. Perceptions of NGO aid will be measured qualitatively via semi-structured interviews. The hope for having a qualitative unit in this analysis is going to be hopefully there'll be additional insights about where NGO funding is going, and then perhaps those interviews will lead to suggestions on how NGO funding can be more effective in Afghanistan. And then back to quantitative is going to be allocation of aid per sector. That will examine where NGO funding is currently being focused, if it's spread pretty evenly across sector, or if there's more of a focus on education or health or the economy. And then we're going to measure the state-sponsored abuses in government. The goal of my research intends to provide a framework for examining NGO aid in other conflict-affected regions, also to help influence the way how the United States perceives where our humanitarian aid is going. There's been a lot of controversy in sending NGO aid, specifically in Afghanistan, but how much we are spending in humanitarian aid via the US aid department. So the mixed methods approach for this design intends to provide room for additional research in Afghanistan. I think that the qualitative analysis part will really have a lot of, um, will be opening the room for more analysis and more research to be done. So that way also too we can examine how humanitarian aid can be more effective, not just in Afghanistan, but in perhaps other conflict affected areas.